20 years ago, the Arizona Territory was a place where the sun scorched the land so fiercely it blurred the horizon and made even the toughest cowboys feel small beneath the endless sky. Caleb Morgan, barely 20 and drifting between horse trading jobs, had no intention of becoming part of any legend. He was simply passing through the canyons, following a worn trail toward the trading post at Dry Rock, when he heard gunfire echoing off the red stone walls. Gunshots weren't unusual in those parts, but there was something different this time, something sharp, desperate, and punctuated by a high, terrified cry. Caleb slowed his horse, listening. The cry came again, thin and trembling, a child. He spurred his horse forward, weaving through narrow passages until he reached a small rocky clearing. There he saw a scene that tightened his chest with anger. 3 outlaws closing in on a tiny figure crouched beneath an overhanging ledge. The girl, no more than 6, pressed her hands over her ears, shaking as the men shouted at her to come out. Her dress was torn, her face smeared with dirt and tears. Behind her, a thin column of smoke rose from the direction of her village. What remained of it? Caleb didn't wait for a plan. He drew his revolver and charged. The bandits turned just in time to see a young cowboy barreling down upon them with fury in his eyes. The first man fell before he could raise his rifle. The second fired wildly, missing Caleb by inches. Caleb returned a shot that caught him clean in the shoulder, sending him tumbling. The third outlaw fled into the rocks, cursing loudly as he disappeared. Silence fell, broken only by the girl's soft sobs. Caleb approached slowly so he wouldn't frighten her more. She stared up at him with huge dark eyes, unsure whether he was another danger. He knelt, lowered his gun, and offered her his coat. After a moment, she whispered her name, Aylin. He knew enough about Apache lands to realize he was standing on sacred ground, and that if her people found him with her, they might kill him before he could explain. Still, he couldn't leave her. He lifted her gently, wrapped her in his coat, and rode straight toward the Apache camp. Warriors surrounded him instantly, arrows drawn. But Aylin slipped from his arms, ran to a woman who fell to her knees sobbing with relief, and told her people what had happened. The chief studied Caleb with cold, measuring eyes, then finally nodded. "You have returned our daughter," he said. "One day she will return to you." Caleb rode away, believing it was only a ceremony of gratitude. He never imagined the promise would shape the rest of his life. 20 years had carved deep lines into Caleb Morgan's face, but they had also carved a quiet peace into his life. He owned a modest ranch on the outskirts of Silver Mesa, a spread of dusty fields, old cottonwoods, and a weather-beaten cabin that had built with his own hands. He lived simply, raising horses, tending cattle, and spending long evenings on the porch with nothing but the sound of wind and crickets for company. He had never married, never stayed long enough with anyone to let his heart settle. Some said he was too stubborn. Others said he was too lonesome. Caleb suspected the truth was something he couldn't name, something unfinished inside him. He thought sometimes about the Apache girl he once saved, wondering if she grew up strong or if she even remembered him. It was a memory he didn't speak of aloud, one of those quiet stories a man carries in his chest, worn smooth from years of turning it over in his mind. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert in burning gold, Caleb noticed a lone figure riding toward the ranch. The rider moved with a calm confidence, seated high and straight in the saddle, her silhouette sharp against the fading light. At first he assumed it was a lost traveler seeking water, or maybe someone wanting to buy a horse, but as the rider drew closer, he felt an odd stillness wash over him, as if the desert itself held its breath. She dismounted with the grace of someone who had spent her entire life in the saddle, an Apache woman, tall, strong, dressed in soft doeskin and beadwork that caught the sun in bright flickers. A single feather hung in her braid, and her eyes were dark, steady, and familiar in a way that stirred something long buried. "Caleb Morgan," she said, her voice calm, but carrying a weight that stopped him cold. "My name is Aylin." For a moment, Caleb couldn't speak. The little girl he had rescued from the canyon was gone, replaced by a woman who carried herself with the presence of a warrior and the poise of someone respected among her people. She told him she had become both a healer and a fighter within her tribe, trained to defend her people and guide them, but she had also been raised with one unbroken truth: a life returned in childhood was a life tied forever. According to Apache tradition, she owed him not servitude but honor, honor in its highest form. A choice, a path, a promise, a return, she said softly, meeting his eyes without hesitation to offer you my hand. Caleb felt the world tilt slightly, as if 20 years had folded in on themselves. He had lived his life expecting nothing more than dust cattle and quiet sunsets. Yet here stood a woman who seemed forged from the same land he'd called home, fierce, loyal, and unyieldingly honest. He didn't know whether he deserved her, or what would come of such a union in a land where hatred still simmered between worlds. But he knew one thing: destiny had caught up with him, riding out of the past in the shape of the girl he once saved, and he wasn't sure whether to be afraid or grateful. The weeks that followed, Aylin's arrival changed Caleb, Morgan's quiet life, in ways he never expected. What began as a shocking reunion slowly turned into an easy companionship. They rode out across the mesas in the early mornings, speaking little at first, but finding a natural rhythm. Two people who understood silence as well as words. Aylin hunted with a bow so skillfully that Caleb found himself watching in quiet admiration. And when she tended to an injured horse with calm, knowing hands, he realized her healing talents ran as deep as her warrior training. Conversations grew longer, evenings stretched warm beside the fire, with stories traded beneath the crackling wood and the rising desert moon. Caleb had lived so long in solitude that he forgot what it meant to share his days and nights with another soul. But good things rarely go unnoticed in the Wild West. Word traveled fast, carried by tongues eager for gossip or trouble. Some folks in Silver Mesa didn't mind Caleb living with an Apache woman. Others saw it as a betrayal of blood and land. And one man in particular, Briggs Tate, leader of a small, vicious gang, saw it as an opportunity. Tate had long wanted Caleb's ranch, a perfect hideout with water and rough country on all sides. When he heard an Apache woman was staying there, hatred lit up inside him like wildfire. He gathered his men and waited for the right night to strike. The attack came under a bruised purple sky, moments after Caleb and Aylin had settled by the fire. The stillness shattered with the crack of rifle shots. A lantern burst, sending sparks flying. Caleb knocked Aylin to the ground and rolled behind a trough, grabbing his Winchester as bullets tore through the quiet. Aylin was already moving, drawing her bow with swift, practiced motions. Her first arrow dropped a man creeping along the fence line. Caleb fired next, taking down another who charged toward the barn. The gang kept coming, fueled by rage rather than strategy. Caleb and Aylin fought as if they had done it for years, each watching the other's flank, each striking fast and without hesitation. But the final danger came from Tate himself, who burst from the shadows wielding a knife, rushing straight at Aylin with murder in his eyes. Caleb lunged, tackling Tate, but the outlaw was stronger and driven by hate. They wrestled in the dirt, blades, flashing fists landing hard. Aylin didn't hesitate. She stepped in, her own blade swift and sure, ending the fight with one decisive strike. Tate collapsed, the hatred in his eyes fading into nothing. Silence returned to the ranch, broken only by their heavy breaths. Caleb looked at Aylin, blood on her arm, dust in her hair, but standing fierce and unbroken. It struck him then how fate had twisted their lives together, not through debt, but through choice, through survival, through something deeper than either had spoken aloud. At sunrise, with the desert glowing soft and gold, they held a simple ceremony. No church, no preacher,